I have the pleasure of introducing Aly. He's involved in a lot of different creative pieces in our community. Things you've heard about SPARKcon. He's got a cool little shop called Designbox. They're doing some really interesting things there. Really cool space if you ever get a chance to check it out. There's this fun little thing called the Kirby Derby that he's involved with, and may or may not have had a hand in the design of City Plaza, downtown Raleigh. His current adventure is called Lyf Company. It's spelled L-Y-F, so I've made sure I made notes correctly. Lyf Company, they're creating line of bags, customized shoes, and they're using a really interesting circular economy model where they're combining 3D printing, onboard electronics, and what they call cradle-to-cradle principles and decentralized manufacturing. He's also an AIGA Fellow as well as an Eisenhower Fellow. So I want to welcome my good friend Aly to come up to the stage.
I don't have any raffle tickets or any presents or anything like that, so apologies in advance. There's not going to be a cash giveaway, and I'm not like Oprah. There's nothing under your seat or anything like that. So I like bald guys, and right? And so anyway, I was very fortunate. When I was 16, my mother took me to an art house film about this crazy guy, Buckminster Fuller, who was believing that there is enough for all, that in fact that as much scarce resources that there are enough resources for all if we really know how to provide and if we know how to share, if we know how to collaborate. And he talked about a design science revolution. We got to put our minds together on how to make sure there's enough for everybody. I was so inspired by that, and it really just changed my life. All of a sudden I wanted to find out about that. How can you do this? Next thing I know, I'm going to design school and engineering school at NC State, and Bucky Fuller taught there. And now I realize that actually my backyard is where he built one of the first geodesic domes, and all that was like built in Dorothea Dix and airlifted out of there. And so it's amazing how things come around. And I just feel very lucky to be here and to be connected again and again. So even though I'm from up north, I've been here since 1986 and feel like this is my home of all homes. One of the things that Bucky Fuller talked about was the design science revolution, which means when you have a problem, you got to investigate it, but you got to investigate it with enthusiasm, right? That we got to go for it with positive energy as much as we can while we're still questioning it the whole way. And that's something that I just kind of keep coming back to as something I want to do. It's not just one or the other. You got to do both together. And while I was at design school, Wayne Taylor Sr., you know, we'll sometimes say an off-color word here and there as a professor, but I really, really loved him, and he actually worked with Bucky Fuller at the College of Design here at State. And one time he just looked at me like just square in the eye and just said, hell, sometimes I got to build the desk before I can write the letter. And it took me a while. It's actually taken me years to sort of understand that, but I understand that. You know, when I got to sit down and do something, and all of a sudden the room's just not right, or the dishes aren't clean, and something's not right, and you got to get that right. If I'm going to do the thing I got to do, everything's got to be right around it. And more and more I've realized that's kind of the way I feel about a lot of things. That's the way I feel about Raleigh. We got to get the desk right. We got to get some things kind of cleaned up and ready to go. I want to just show a little bit about what I do. Sometimes people say, well, you're doing a lot in the community. How does this really work? How do you make a living at it? Well, truthfully, I don't really make a living at doing a lot of the community work I do. I just enjoy it. I'm just passionate about it. But I do get a lot from it. So Designbox is a group. I've been working, I guess, since '95, offices in Raleigh, and we've had just a lot of great talent come through all there. And we realized after a while that it was like a three-legged stool. The only way to have a successful company was to have these three elements of it. It was like, one of which is we got to do some consulting services. That's what really pays the bills. But we're all creative folk, and just you can't only squeeze a sponge so much. After a while, there's nothing left in that sponge, right? So you got to refill that sponge, and that's what we started realizing, like, we got to really engage the community. In fact, a lot of people will come to work and say, man, you know, I just tripped on that thing for the 7th time on the sidewalk, and I'm just sick and tired of that thing. Like, let's go fix that, or whatever it is. Or I just can't believe that there's, you know, this is the home of funk, right? Like, there's so many great funk musicians. Just from Wake County is phenomenal, but why don't I hear funk music around here? We should do a festival to highlight local creativity, or whatever. And at the same time, once in a while, we have to take take the step to try to launch something ourselves. And so we've launched a few things. So SPARKcon, I'll talk to you a little bit about as something where we just said, someone's got to do it. We've done a lot of stuff in the community, and I'll show just real briefly so people understand. So designing sunglasses, working a lot on bicycle stuff. So this is kind of how we earn our daily bread. And all these projects, this is working with the U.S. Pro team on their gloves. Another project was working with India, how to get a site out to rural communities by having something where you can just dial it in. You don't need an eye doctor. You can just get it so you can read it, and then you can read your prescription and get those glasses if you don't have eyewear shops. Or in rural Mongolia where they have record levels of emphysema because they're burning coal inside their home because they can't otherwise stay warm and cook. And so working on solar cookers that people can use. Actually, you can generate an amazing amount of heat even up in Mongolia like that. There's things that we can do. There's also been some fun projects. I've been able to collaborate with other designers. Stefan Sagmeister always has these ridiculous, impossible designs that he wants to do, and then it's my job to see, well, how do we bring that into the real world? Even doing some music. That was for a David Byrne album. And then I've had the chance to also do some of our own launches. So one of the things that we did was a little coffee thing. It started off a little business that we did for doing tea, a tea infuser, for those of you guys like tea. And we ended up doing a coffee press, and we used Kickstarter to raise money. And the whole community here got behind us to help make this dream come true of how to make coffee. I mean, it's just really simple, but our whole thing is we don't want to use all this waste, all the plastic K-cups and all the trash and all that stuff. How can we make it so everything goes to compost? And I'd realize when you can raise $130,000 just because everyone says, yeah, let's do it, there's some power in the crowd. There really is some power in the crowd. And when we started looking at all these different projects that we're doing, the key to them being successful was that our team's really diverse. They're diverse in terms of age, where they're coming from. We have people right now from China, from Sweden, from Raleigh. I mean, people kind of coming all from different places, coming into design late in life or starting off that way. And we started to realize that also it was important to reach out to the community to find other people that weren't necessarily sitting around in our studio. And the more we got different perspectives, the stronger our work got. So that was one of the reasons we started thinking about what else can we learn from it. So Al Gore's speechwriter, Dan Pink, at some point in the Oval Office hadn't slept for 3 days and then face planted. He just passed out or something like that, being completely overworked, quit his job and wrote this book about how the workforce of America is changing. Free Agent Nation is kind of there's a lot of people kind of doing independent things but forming their own networks, which makes you resilient, right? If you have a network of people that are all looking out for each other and you're all doing something, you don't have to be in a big company to be strong. You don't have to grow, but you have to be resilient. You have to be like that perennial that keeps coming back every year in your garden, right? Resiliency is where you need to be. Anyway, we learned a lot about, from his, insight, that whatever we were doing as a design studio, a lot of other people have those kinds of same things. We all have clients. We all really care about our community. We all have skills that we have to keep developing. And after a while, we realized it didn't matter actually what profession you're in. We all kind of have the same thing. It's slightly different content, but we all have to worry about these things the same way. So we ended up forming Designbox as a way, just a bunch of co-working. And I guess Marianne Baldwin was recently mentioned to me, you guys were the first co-working space in Raleigh. And our thought was everything is really expensive, but we can get a big warehouse for cheap, so let's just get a bunch of desks, and that was co-working, But that's really what it was, and we also started realizing that we can all care for each other and help each other. If you're an architect or trying to do renovations or whatever, you're just one person, but every Wednesday, you get 20 minutes of everyone's time to say, help me with my problem, and we can all do that, and then 20 minutes later, you're helping someone else with their problem. And after a while, you start to realize, you don't need to carry all this on your payroll. You don't need to do everything yourself. The community's there for you, as long as you're there with them. So anyway, we've had lectures, and we did a lot of First Friday shows. So we were one of the first 4 galleries doing First Friday, including a pole dancing stuffed kitten. We had a lot of, interesting shows kind of come through, and, that allowed us to meet a whole lot of people. So some people would hold, yoga classes in there. We'd have, internet summit parties, whatever else. We had Arc'teryx, a big clothing line, kind of want to launch their product line. And so we started realizing First Friday, man, there was an energy about that. And again, when it was only 4 galleries, it cost $100 to put a little postage stamp ad in the News and Observer. and most of the, out of the 4 galleries, like 2 would pay. It was really painful. What First Friday is now is very, very different. But now, even the New York Times will cover like the kind of stuff that's happening in the warehouse district. I mean, it's what a turnaround now that it's become kind of like a nationally known thing, what we're doing. It also allowed us to do some interesting projects. So Clark Whittington in Winston-Salem was taking old cigarette machines and saying, you know what, instead of selling something bad, let's sell something good. And was able to do a whole project where we worked with students in Durham to develop art that's the same size of cigarette boxes, and you can just buy art through a cigarette machine. Let's turn this thing around. He's now been all over the world installing these artomats. So overall, what we realize is we do want people who are from a lot of different places to be in our space. And we realize when people would come into Designbox, some people would say, hey, who's going to get my coffee or something like that, and be like, you're going to get your own coffee. And we started realizing that to be a great collaborator, you have to be community-minded. That if there's a mess on the floor, the person you want with you is the person who says, where's the mop? Because I'm going to clean that up, not someone go clean this up. That was a really powerful lesson. Happened in many ways, but it's something that we learned a lot about, trying to maintain this inventive culture, so our employees are happy, so that we're happy, we're doing good work. So one project that kind of hit home was when the convention center is being built, 200,000 cubic yards of dirt were being dug up in order to make room for that space. Our neighborhood's on Kirby Street, which is right next to the Dorothea Dix, and where the dump was. It's a decommissioned dump at this point, which will now be a park, I guess, but at the time, they're trying to figure out what to do with this dirt, and Councilman Crowder, came walking up to me and a few other people in the neighborhood and was expressing, listen, we're going to have to dump some dirt next to your house. And, it's just not a little, it's like 200,000 cubic yards of dirt. And I was like, wow, so that's a lot, what are you guys going to do? And the plan was to take 4.2 feet of dirt, above the ground, evenly spread, and wipe out an entire stand of trees throughout Dix, this huge stand of pine trees that are there. It would take a lot of oaks and all that stuff, and it just didn't seem like a creative solution. And so, Thomas, is there something else we can do with that dirt? I mean, what if we say yes to the dirt, but not yes to that solution, not yes to that design? Is there something else we can do? He said, yeah. How do you want to do it? It's well, let's have a charrette. Let's do something. Let's get the whole community together. And let's say dirt is good. It's just not decimating and a stand of trees is good. Let's try to find something else with that. And so at the time, Dan Douglas helped with his space at the Urban Design Center. We got, at each table, we had a collection of personalities. So we made sure we split up everyone who was a friend, but we would have a dump truck operator sitting next to a soccer mom, sitting next to a stakeholder resident who has property value directly attached to it, next to a landscape architect. And we had each of these tables with these completely different sets of people sitting together. One of the really interesting things that happened was, I remember this one mother was saying, listen, one of my sons plays soccer, and when he's playing soccer, the other one is just, my little girl is just running away the opposite direction. Can we just put a hill to slow her down? Can we just, and bulldozer guy was right next to her, goes, absolutely, you know what? We can just drive around, make this huge bowl. It's super simple for us. We'll just dump this thing in a line going all the way around. And sure enough, that's actually what started to happen. So finally, where the soccer fields are at Dix, which are in bad need of maintenance, I'll just mention, but we actually, created this thing, and the community to design the solution, and it was parents, and it was bulldozer people, and it was city people. In fact, there's Dan Howe on the left, who originally was in charge of the program when they're talking about completely leveling it, and here he's showing a design about a butterfly garden that would be created through these interesting designs. And so even the people who had originally kind of not pushed themselves creatively, when they were confronted with all these different personalities around them, were all of a sudden coming up with really, really wonderful ideas. I hope this continues to build at Dix, because I think we have a lot of possibility there. And the thing was, it wasn't dirt that was bad, it was the design that was bad, and it was the reason the design was bad, because we hadn't had enough community input about how we can deal with this issue together. So it's built out there now. You can see a bunch of it, and I won't go too far into the detail. And then it was really wonderful to see that finally now we got Dick's Park happening. I don't know how comfortable that particular moment was, because it was a long time coming, but it did happen. I'll talk a little bit about SPARKcon, but one of the things that was really interesting about SPARKcon was Mayor Meeker, who was a big inspiration to me, at one point said, well, what did you learn through SPARKcon? And I'll talk to you a little bit about it, but I said, well, we realized that the people who are really into technology said there needs to be more public art, and the people who are into public art said there needs to be more technology. And he thought that was a really interesting thing. He said, well, we just had this issue with an artist from Spain called Plensa, who was trying to build a project on City Plaza, and things didn't go according to plan. And so can you help us kind of rethink what City Plaza can be? This is like on Fayetteville Street, that main square. So we did the same kind of process. We just got a bunch of people together. I think we had about 140 people. I mean, it didn't look that different than this, a bunch of round tables. Again, people from all different walks of life, all forced to sit together and come up with some creative ideas. And all of a sudden, we had this idea of 4 towers that could project these images. And, and then finally, this entire design came out. So it's thrilling now to see, like, what is happening in City Plaza, that again and again it is a place where things happen. And really the realization that the whole group came up with is that there's no one piece of art that will make up what should be on City Plaza. What the group came and said is City Plaza should be a stage for what the city does and for who the city is. So what we did at City Plaza, we built a stage. It's got gas, it's got internet, it's got water, it's plumb for anything that you might want to do there. And I just thought it was a beautiful statement by all the people that came. Is like, there's no one piece of art. It's like, this needs to be something, but it's like a playground for us to show how we're changing and how things are. And we all own City Plaza, and we all should be able to do whatever we want with it to show who we are. So, including, Fire Circus, or what you'll see is like SPARKcon down there now. Another thing that we've realized, and this is the racier side of the show. A friend of mine was a victim of breast cancer, and I was pretty devastated. She is a survivor, and she's still with us, and it's, we feel very lucky about all that. But it woke me up to the fact that I hadn't done anything about that. That it's a problem in my community, it's a problem in my personal life, and I felt like I hadn't done enough to address it personally. And so I happened to see a project. I was traveling through Germany, and I saw this really interesting project where there was a snowboarder in Europe who, at the age of 23, died of breast cancer. And she had never been screened, and if she had been screened, we would have caught it. She'd still be with us, but that one of the things is there was like a real taboo. I think this dialogue has changed a little bit. When I used to talk about breast cancer, people would kind of blush, including myself. I think now we're realizing it's really important for any public health issue is that we can't hide from public health. We got to embrace it. We just need to have the right vocabulary and the right attitude in how we talk about it. Anyway, I saw this project with all these snowboarders making art to talk about, you better get screened. Screen yourself. Take care of yourself. And we're not ashamed of our bodies. We're not ashamed of of having to confront something that is killing way too many women every single year. So keep abreast. I talked to the group there, and Shani Jo Darden, one of the like a big surf designer chick in San Francisco, said, "Yeah, we just did it here. Let's do it in Raleigh. Yeah, let's go." And so she taught us a bunch of different techniques, ways, strategies, how to engage the community, and then we kind of built on it a little bit here. So we actually kind of did the Raleigh version of this. So the first step was we found a bunch of women who were willing to cast themselves. They cast their torsos in plaster. Then we had a whole other group of artists then come and basically do an auction about which plaster cast would they want to work with to do their art. And what resulted was just like this incredible set of artists that came out and represented their artwork in so many different ways. And it was a really fantastic thing. So, this is kind of early on in us doing community engagement. And here we raised, $10,000 in one night. But not only that, we had 60 different people who are casting themselves, people who were strangers, coming together, say, we got to do this. This is important. So we kind of had a public health network, right? People really care about that. Then we had a bunch of artists saying, we're going to donate our art. We're going to donate our time to communicate that. That's a whole nother network of people. Then what we did is we put these on a road show. So they're in doctors' offices and salons and boutiques and all that stuff, these pieces that went around town. Now we had a third network, which is people who are in the public and ready to talk about it and want to educate. And so what we found is by activating 3 different networks, we had a giant network, and all of a sudden we had a really successful thing in our hands. We were all blown away. I mean, there was like not many dry eyes going on. I mean, it was really incredible. And then as a result, we were able to start giving money to charities and also becoming, like, these artworks still live on to kind of tell that story. Incidentally, then Shani Jo came back and said it was the most successful Keep Abreast that she had ever seen. She goes, I don't know what it is about Raleigh, but you guys have got it going on. We've never been able to pull anything like this off. What we realized through that, when I really understood from Shani Jo, is that she had a structure. Here's some directions on how to do a cast. Here's what, best practices for artists working with this stuff. Here's how to reach out to the community so people can get it out there. And so there's kind of it was a very loose structure. We were all unified by a clear vision on what it is that we're trying to do, but the structure was loose. We're not telling anyone what kind of art to make. We're not telling them what's appropriate, not appropriate. Like, the crowd will mitigate that. But what we just needed to make sure is that we want to have the energy is like vision and loose structure. And time and again, almost every single thing we've done has been like that, is that you don't want to control things too much, because there's a lot of great minds. There's a lot of great minds in this room. There's a lot of great minds of people who've made SPARKcon or everything else that we've done. You just need to have just enough structure that people don't feel lost. It's not a blank piece of paper. There's a scribble on it that you can at least start with. That's been key. So I'm going to mention just a little bit about our neighborhood, Pullen Park Terrace. It's 27 homes. Probably we're the mouse that roared, in a way. I mean, we've been a thorn in a lot of city things that have happened, I'm sure, and Catholic dioceses and everywhere else. But anyway, just with 27 homes, it's been fantastic to have an impact. I mean, we've probably got to be one of the smallest neighborhoods in Raleigh, but I don't know, I think I have like 9 keys of like different residents in the neighborhood. They all have my keys. I have no idea. I mean, we just all sharing stuff. We're all taking care of each other's dogs. I mean, it's almost like one big family. I can't imagine this being anywhere else. And I'm just very, very pleased. And I don't think it's just about the neighborhood. I think it's a reflection of Raleigh. And I think also sometimes when the community is just kind of ready to open up and talk to each other, those things just happen. So anyway, it's a fantastic place. So whether watching like an ACC game or it's ridiculous when we're trick-or-treating, because like it's almost the entire neighborhood walking around the block, so no one's really there to answer the door, But it's a little embarrassing, but. So we have we have Kirby Derby Day. At one point, and this was just sort of like a tongue-in-cheek thing that happened, was out of the 27 homes, 7 people show up for the neighborhood meeting. That's really good participation, right? I mean, that's like 25%, right? But it's not many. And so I was the 7th one when I had moved into that neighborhood, and I was the person who had not yet been neighborhood president. And they looked at me and they said, Aly, it's your turn. And I said, no, I'm moving. I'm not, no. And a year later, they're like, you're still here. So I said, well, the only way I'm going to be neighborhood president, there's going to be a parade right down the middle of the street. And I thought that was a threat, I thought that was going to freak them out. And they're like all in favor and unanimous. That upset me. So I talked to my friend Carla Ray. Carla Ray is a wonderful hairdresser, and if now if one of the stars comes to PNC or something like that, they're going to request Carla Ray. She's a fantastic hairdresser and a personality that is just so wonderful. And I came to Carla kind of desperate, and because it was really my wife who mentioned the parade thing. She thought that would work, and it didn't. And I said, Carla, we got to figure this out, but there's a parade coming, and I don't know. I just need some help figuring out how this is going to happen, because they're going to pay for this. And she just looked at me and said, oh, are there going to be clowns? I said, why, Carla? She goes, because I hate clowns. I said, Carla, there might be a lot of clowns. She goes, well, if there are clowns, I'm going to have to form a brigade to protect the people who really hate clowns, right? And so the more she talked about how much she didn't like clowns, and she was socializing this now around town, and a hairdresser will see a lot of people, and so anyway, she was talking about how much there needs to be a group that stands up for people who really don't like clowns. And we happened to be in Moonlight Pizza, and while this discussion was happening, one of the bus guys was walking by, and he goes, "Wait a second, what's this about clowns?" She's like, "Well, these clowns are just creepy. I just don't like clowns, and we just cannot have clowns at this parade." And he goes, "Well, that doesn't sound very fun. Like, what are you gonna do?" And so anyway, he got very concerned. So this guy had actually spent a lot of time in Mardi Gras, and he liked clowns. And not only that, he heard about this, and he didn't really like the normal kind of clown that we're used to seeing at birthday parties, but he thought what happened is but we need to protect those clowns against Carla and her brigade. So immediately he forms this militant clown brigade to protect the clowns against Carla. And the more this happened, then Carla's like, "Oh my gosh, there's gonna be militant clowns? That's even worse." And so then she had to have a bigger anti-clown brigade, and the more that happened, then we had to have escalation on the other side. And so before you knew it, Kirby Derby was all about clowns versus anti-clowns. So it built up, and after Kirby Derby won, it was a lot going on. We had floats and all kinds of stuff going, all kinds of shenanigans, and so then there was there's Kirby Derby the sequel was year 2, and the neighborhood really has owned it. As much as I was trying to instigate something against them to get even, they appreciated it and really ran with it. So the third year was Bride of Kirby Derby, of course, right? I mean, we were running low on themes, so you have to go to your Dracula movies. So anyway, we had Bride of Kirby Derby, and Bridezilla showed up. She's about 8 foot tall, paper mache creature that was there. And after that Kirby Derby, she was sitting in the back of our house, just kind of admiring Dorothea Dix, for a while. The flowers were plastic, so they kept up. The bouquet looked good all year. And then about 3 months before the 4th Kirby Derby, she disappeared. And we didn't know what to do. And we just heard about this thing called Amber Alerts. So we did a faux Amber Alert, through Facebook and everywhere else saying, "Have you seen Bridezilla? Please, please report in." And sure enough, it started coming in. She was spotted in 3 different places around town. She was in Centennial Parkway and different places, and people were just placing around town having fun with her. And so Bridezilla, then of course the 4th year was the search of Bridezilla, because and then with all the usual suspects. And man, ever since then, things have really built on this, and we realize that themes are really important, that if you actually want to do civic engagement, you can provide a time and a place, but that theme, where's Bridezilla, or whatever it's going to be, clowns versus anti-clowns. And so every year we started kind of coming up with different themes, and that actually becomes, I think, the key to getting creative, inventive behavior from your crew. It's a loose structure, a clear vision, and then you give a theme, and people start digging it. I mean, it's 1 month after every Kirby Derby, people are like, "All right, what's the theme next year? What? I need to know. I got to get busy. I got to start building stuff." So we have a wonderful time with the parade. We're happy that the Oakwood Awesomettes show up every year and do all kinds of stuff. So we have a great time. We have Pinewood Derby cars. We have drag races because it is North Carolina. So drag races are important, which means dressing in drag and speed walking. So anyway, it's been a fantastic thing, and because of Mr. Bagley over here and his crew, all of a sudden we were submitted for a national award, and we brought back silver. So our little teeny neighborhood, I mean, who would have thunk it? And then when you look at what the other neighborhoods were doing across the country, whether it's re-entry from incarcerated, populations or whatever else, the amount of serious stuff that neighborhoods all over the country are doing. I mean, I was blown away. I was embarrassed actually to get the award, because some people are doing some really, really amazing stuff. So anyway, what happened for the 16th year, I have 2 little kids, they're only 5 and 8, but I know the day's coming when they got to get out, And so for the 16th year, because Kirby Derby had grown to about 3,000 people, I think, it was time to get it out of the hood, and we also thought it'd be a great gesture for Dorothea Dix to be able to bring our neighborhood event to Dick's. In fact, I challenge every neighborhood to bring something to Dick's, because a lot of people are expecting stuff from the Dorothea Dix Park, but actually it's a chance for us to do something there. It's a new playground. It's like a community garden. It's a community park. I think we should all, as neighborhoods, claim individual parts of Dorothea Dix Park and bring something there, whether it's a garden, whether it's lighting up a house, whether it's a practice space, whether it's doing your meeting. I don't know what it is. But we thought it was an opportunity for us to be able to do that. So we were able to do something just August 26th, the first time that it had left the neighborhood. And look at that velvet cake. You know, for Sweet 16, look at that. That's a nice birthday cake. That's all welded steel. It's amazing some of the talent we really have in this town and what people come up with. So our finish line's a speed bump. So... And I love it because I don't think those headlights were popped up before he hit that. One of the takeaways, you know, for us is like there is a lot of value in play. Being silly together really will bind up a neighborhood. That's, I think, where a lot of us, like, you know, when there's nothing else to talk about in the neighborhood, we can always talk about, like, my wreck at Kirby Derby this year or whatever it is. There's plenty to talk about, and that kind of gel us together. I think the more neighborhoods can play together, the better. It doesn't all have to be serious work. So SPARKcon is something that's happening right now. The very first SPARKcon that we had was about as big as this. And that was year one. I think we had 250 people. It was sold out. We couldn't believe it. Now it's a little bit bigger. I think last year they were thinking it was maybe between 70 and 75,000 people. This year might be more than that. It's already pretty full down there on Fayetteville Street. So it all happened because at one of our Designbox meetings, I think it was a Money magazine article that came out that said Raleigh was the most creative city. And so for us, a bunch of designers, architects, copywriters, photographers, we're all just sitting around at lunch, and everyone was just depressed. Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is as good as it gets. Like, we should feel happy, you know, but, I mean, there's nowhere else we can go that's going to be better, that's going to, you know, reward artists, where artists can make a living, where designers can make a living. I mean, like, a lot of us are kind of on shoestrings here, and it's like, this is as good as it gets. That's just not right. And Paul Frederick is a cartoonist who was also hanging out in the space, and I think cartoonists always have a way of speaking truth, you know? And he says, well, you know, Raleigh doesn't have a river, but everyone says we're creative, so we should just claim that. And I couldn't let that idea go. It was like one of those things, like I just kept hearing Paul say that again and again overnight, so I came back, and 1 week later, I had a one-page thing, like, what would it mean if Raleigh was going to claim creativity? What would that mean? And so started thinking about it. I was like, well, some way you have to expose it. You need to show it. You need to show off the talent that's here. And we're through Designbox, we were learning there's more and more talent that's around that is just kind of in the nooks and crannies and is not really coming out. Also, you got to support that network. You got to teach them basic skills, how to protect themselves with intellectual property so people don't rip off your songs or people don't rip off your art or things like that. You got to nurture that. You got to train people on how to be careful, how to earn a living, and all that stuff. So that became this idea of like, well, let's have a Spark conference about that. So you'll see a bunch of stuff going on. I think we have about 700 kids who will just be street painting. There's a lot of people who've been working all night, so it already looks really good down there. When we first looked at it, I was inspired by Richard Florida, who wrote The Rise of the Creative Class. I always just thought like that his conclusions were not something I agreed with. I didn't like the idea of a class. I didn't like a lot of the stuff that was in that book. But I did like what he studied and the demographics and what he was realizing, how things change in cities. And gentrification, all that stuff is not necessarily the way to go. There's actually a lot of other different mechanisms, but you have to understand how cities work. And also you have to recognize that certain people are willing to put more time into fixing up an old building than others. And how does that dynamic work? So anyway, I think there's a lot of interesting studies, like conclusions, I'm not with them. But one of the takeaways from it was like, okay, if we're gonna start talking about a creative scene, and SPARKcon was coming out of this, like how do we claim it? We thought about these four main principles about arts, technology, inclusivity, and independent business. So as an example, at Designbox, operating an art gallery for many years, we would see, we have a lot of artists that would come through, do fabulous work. We would threaten people at shows. We're saying, you get a show in 2 months, you better start framing. Just because we knew they were great, but they were never willing to put their stuff up there and not having the confidence. And we would have all the other artists who would come out and support them. But artists don't buy art. Newsflash, They don't have the money to buy the art, right? So like an artist community doesn't work with only having artists. You need people who buy art. And then we'd have like a programmer from RTP or something like that who only buys blue paintings or whatever they're into, right? But they would buy art if it was on that theme or on this or whatever. And so we realized, okay, the arts and technology is working together a little bit. I can see that. But also it's like, a lot of artists have to work. They're waiting tables, or they're doing something else like, making coffee, whatever it is to kind of support them just enough to get through so they can do that creative thing they really love. So without independent business, that's not working. And finally, if we're not sharing, if we're not like looking at each other's work, if we're not thinking about other people's cultures, it's still amazing to me, like the huge amount of Chinese population that is in Raleigh that I don't see represented at most things like this, or Indian, or, we're very diverse. We got a lot of diversity. Are we inclusive? Not yet enough. So we thought really the spirit of inclusivity would be key for all this stuff to work. So that was really the principles of it. On the organization side, here's what to not do. So when we first started talking about how are we going to organize SPARKcon, we said, okay, well, we'll do a committee for this and a committee for that and another committee for this, but oh, wait, we have to coordinate everybody, and then we're going to have like this one communicator, Katrina, who's going to be able to keep everything together, and man, she almost completely imploded after 3 months. No one really knew how to communicate with each other. It was really a disaster. It was scaling very fast from 250 people to the first year to then a couple thousand the second year, and we started realizing we don't know how to organize ourselves. We weren't prepared to be successful or prepared to be big. And so then we started thinking about how else can we organize. I think this book, The Starfish and the Spider, is a fantastic education on thinking about network theory. But basically, a spider has a central nervous system, and it controls all the legs and all that stuff, right? But you take away the head, and the spider is gone. The organism is gone. You have a starfish. Sometimes you can cut them in half and get another starfish. In fact, there is no real central nervous system. In fact, the legs actually have to kind of talk to each other and communicate to each other to move in a certain direction. Not good for going fast, but it is good for being resilient. And if you look at the civil rights movement, if you look at women's suffrage movement, if you look at a lot of the powerful things that have happened, they've actually been starfish models. It's not been a central person calling the shots. But there are key factors about that. So for instance, in women's suffrage, most people don't know about Elizabeth Stanton. But she's the one who really wrote a lot of the important stuff that was behind it. But Susan B. Anthony, she was the one that was out there as the communicator. And what you have to realize, there's usually these two. In almost every movement, you'll see that. You have someone who is on the spreadsheet or who can write the really great stuff. You have someone else who can go out there and really connect with people. And those two people need to work together. So in SPARKcon, what we did is we created this starfish model. And this is the key to how the whole thing works, is that within SPARKcon right now, there's Art Spark, there's Fashion Spark, there's 14 different Sparks. And every year, we can't tell you what they're going to be. I think Jason's, from an open source perspective, has kind of recognized that it's pretty much an open source deal. Every year, I can't tell you what's going to happen. There's no way. There's too many people, there's too much stuff, but I can tell you one thing, we're organized all the same way. So what we do is we make sure there's a planner, the visionary, the person with the spreadsheet, the person who is really kind of thinking about the details of it. But then you have the advocate, the person who's going out at night, who's communicating, who's saying, you guys need to be a part of Circus Spark too, or whatever it is. And those two people are really working together. We found that sometimes a spark, like a fashion spark, someone would say, I can do both. And be like, okay, in 60 days, you're going to be crying. You're just going to freak out because you're going to be overwhelmed. You don't know what to do. And it's because you kind of need to have those two different people. Plus, partnership is really important when you're building something. But then there's also a DNA. So we have all these open source documents about how do you fundraise, how do you do this, how do you plan an event, how do you take care of insurance, all those different things. But we actually have an open source document anyone can read and do it themselves. So you can form your own Spark. So we don't know if you want to do Tattoo Spark, we've done that. Whatever it is, it's as long as you go through this DNA and you have those two people, you can do it. The other two things, making sure we tap existing networks. Too often we see people say, I'm going to make up this thing, and and here's who I want, and it's going to be all my friends, or something like that, and not really tapping, like, who else is doing that? So when Circus Spark started, as an example, I really pushed them, these two wonderful girls that are still doing Circus Spark, said, listen, who else is out there? Well, there's magicians in Zebulon, and there's jugglers out in Wake Forest, and they started reaching out and realizing there's all these other networks of other people, and so Circus Spark is probably one of our biggest sparks right now, because there's so much talent out there. Who would have known, right? But you have to look for those networks. You can't just say you're going to build it yourself. There's always someone else who's already done it. Can you connect to them? That's the job. And then finally, like in a living system, you got to have a regular heartbeat. That whatever you do, you don't want to have like emails or texts or whatever. Where are we going to meet? When are we going to meet? No, it's every Tuesday at 7 o'clock at the Borough. Lit Spark is going to sit there and talk about literature, or the poets are going to get together at the Borough or whatever, at Raleigh Times or wherever it's going to be. But that way, if anyone runs into someone who should be incorporated, you can send them there, right? So you need to have that regular thing, no matter what. Even if one person shows up, you're just there, and at least it's just two of you catching up, or you can, whatever it is that you're going to do. But we found that was really important. And then what we did is we made sure that all that stuff is published. So every meeting and all that stuff is out there. Everything's on a Google Sheet. There's no like keeping information away from anyone else. Like it all has to be out there. What were people saying? What were people doing? So that it doesn't feel like a club that you're not a part of. And we found by these 5 main elements, we're no longer producing a festival. What we started realizing is like through all these different sparks, what we're really doing is just leadership development. We would just train people on how to raise money. We would train people how to produce an event. We'd train people how to be open and nice to strangers. We would do all this training. We do this training. We no longer really have to produce an event because they're doing the event. So what we want to do is just train tomorrow's leaders. So we've seen like people who have been like on the runway at the fashion show. There's a great one last night in the fountain outside of Mamandi, which is wild. But we've seen someone who's been on the runway as a model. The next year saying, I want to really help and be a part of this. Can I help organize? The third year then being the head of Fashion Spark. The fourth year then being in what we call as the bobbleheads, like the central group, because we're not allowed to say yes or no. We have to say, we'll try to work it out. And then 2 years after that, running a major PR firm for the fashion industry in Manhattan. And we watched this person just take off. And I could tell you, I could bore you with those kinds of stories. And it's been a real success, and that's also going to help build Raleigh as a brand. It's also making families proud. It's also developing us as a fashion scene. We have people coming down here now to like scout out what we're doing, and not just fashion, but also graffiti or tattoo or music or you name it. We are a creative, wonderful, inclusive place. We have a lot of work to do, but there's some great talent here. And so what we've been doing is just trying to like give that spark and let Raleigh just do its thing. One of the things that we did is we published the first year the SPARKcon comment. So we had a group like this come together for that very first year and ask the arts people, how do we make this a thriving art scene? Ask the technology people, how do you make a thriving technology scene? And it's interesting because they all talked about each other. They all needed that other group to be in the room. I mean, that was kind of the consistent thing that came out. And at the end of the day, we kind of had these 10 takeaways that we published. And I think this has helped because I think some of our city councilors and other people have worked from this. And I think it's something that we all need to continue to work to because this is what the crowd said. This is what we said as a city about what it's going to take. So I'm not going to spend too much time on all those things, but if we ask ourselves important questions, I think we can develop some pretty clear answers about what we need to do. I want to tell just one little story. Does anyone remember the barrel monster that showed up on Hillsborough? Yeah, so Joe Carnevale, like in the middle of the night, found some barrels on the street and decided to like cut them up and make this barrel monster on Hillsborough Street right while they were doing that first traffic circle. And so anyway, he made this thing and got caught by the police, got in trouble. And we were, Sarah Powers and I were reading the article about Joe's work, because, a lot of people kind of, like, loved it, it's pretty good. And so anyway, the News and Observer had reached out to the barrel company and said, well, what do you guys think about this? And they said, we love it. It's like, if he had asked us for those barrels, we would have given them to him to do this. Are you kidding us? And so then Sarah and I called the barrel company, like, are you serious? I said, yeah. So, well, we need some barrels. And then we talked to Joe, and Joe, what's going on? He's like, well, I'm going to have to do community service. I'm going to have to hit all these hours of community service that he's going to have to do. And who does that, does that work for? Does that work for like let's say a nonprofit, kind of like SPARKcon? And yeah, that would work. That would fulfill all the needs that we have. So next thing you know, at SPARKcon we had the next barrel monster is this barrel dinosaur that showed up in the middle of Fayetteville Street. So his community service was creating the next work of art. So the irony of ironies is that there was, after the first night, Marine had had too much to drink and decided that he needed to face off with this dinosaur. So he took it down, one of the legs he took down, and we have, security on site. So then, so an officer chased down this Marine. He actually handcuffed him to a chair while he got more people to come on and show up. And so one of the people that was contacted, of course, was Joe, the artist. Say, Joe, you got to come down and see if we can repair this or not. So he shows up to kind of see what happened with his piece of artwork, and he looks at the officer, and the officer looks at him, and the officer realized he's the one who had arrested Joe. Isn't Raleigh great? Anyway. What we've realized through all this process is that, leadership development is the key. We have great talent here. We've got a great place to live. We need to train ourselves how to be leaders, right? We need to find ways to be able to take the vision that each of you are talking through Unconference and all that stuff to develop the skills for each of you to be a leader. And while that person's being a leader, we're all followers, because the better you are at a follower, the better you're at being a leader. And what we need to do is really spend some time on that. I think it's so exciting you guys are here on this Saturday, really plugging through some important issues. And so props to all of you. Thank you so much. And hopefully I'll see you guys down at SPARKcon.